I have Turtle with me.
Great. Well, here we are. So this is the second Conversations with Grief and Water, a series for SOULand. And we have Francis Weller, which I'm so excited. And I'm just going to let you respond to that message that was received on the 2nd of December last year. And really happy to have you here. So I'm going to let you now respond in your own way. Thank you.
It's really good to be with you, Azul. The message touched me very deeply and spoke to a kind of sorrow that has long been with me, this feeling of somehow being separated and segregated from the living world. But to feel the love that was in that message was quite healing all by itself. But the others have not left us, that we have left the others, you know. That their willingness and their availability to be there to help us mend our amnesia, the great forgetting that we have been subject to the past many centuries. That is a source of nourishment for me on a day-by-day basis. So deeply grateful to receive that message from you, from them, reminding us of our deep, deep intimacy between the human and the more than human world. And part of the feeling was a recall, trying to help us recall our more elemental natures. You know, that we can become so forgetful and so caught in a ideology of domestication, that part of the deep grief we carry is that we have forgotten that very primal relationship between the world and the human and the world. And so I think that the way back to that is through grief, is through the heart's capacity to register loss and absence through sorrow. That's one of grief's greatest gifts to us, is that it breaks the heart back open to touch and to be back into a connection with what it is that we've lost.
There's a question that arises just right now, knowing a bit about you and your work. Is there something you can speak about the relationship between grief and water?
Well, you know, traditionally most grief rituals are water rituals. It is the intimate correspondence between this water and the great water. You know, water in many traditions is the element of healing, of reconciliation, of renewal, of cleansing. So whenever we go to a grief ritual, that's exactly what we're doing. We're trying to participate in a very primal, deeply embedded ritual process that is corresponding to its other element, which is water. We put large water bowls at the base of the grief shrine. Sometimes people will go down to the grief shrine without any tears, but then they'll put their hand in the water, and there's an immediate call and response between these two worlds. We also do a ritual where we go and gather stones at the ocean that have been bathed in salt water, and we bring them to the ritual, and people use the stones to speak their grief into them. And then they're returned to the salt water. And these tears, the salt water from our tears, are then mixed back in with the ocean water tears. It's very healing. I got distracted there by my own computer.
Water.
Water.
Grief, water, rituals.
Yeah.
There is, shall I help you out a bit?
Go ahead.
Something that struck me in that message as well is that, and it's not the first message, and we can talk about the others another time, could be another interview, is that water seems to never want to be alone. It's in every message, she always wants to bring the others as well with her. So in that particular message, she talks about we, and she names, soil and trees and plants and ancestors as well. It's like the living, the non-living. As part of, it seems like as they come together, something can then be released or remembered or awakened. Can you speak a bit about that with your experience?
That's a good reminder too of that thread of it, because in our fiction, particularly Western psychological fiction, even our religious fiction, is that salvation is private. It's very insular, it's very internal, and it's something you have to do on your own. But I think that is a very debilitating fiction.
Mm-hmm.
I have never seen that happen. I've never seen healing occur outside of a restoration of relationship. I think that is what healing is the restoring of our sense of belonging, our sense of participation, our sense of getting outside of the me, which is actually a form of solitary confinement.
Yeah.
So that message of we that the water is speaking to, I think, is foundational for what healing really looks like. I recently took a class on neuropsychology, and all of the exercises were meditations and very deeply internal. Beautiful, that's very valuable work. But I began thinking about, well, what is it that regulates psyche in a larger context, and that is community and ritual. Those are the traditional means by which we re-regulated trauma, we took care of grief, we managed the rips and tears of being a human being in this lifetime. It was always modulated through the architecture and technology of ritual and community. It was not a private thing. You didn't go into your own little hut to somehow figure this out. So when water speaks in that inclusive language, I think that is a deep reminder of the matrix of healing, which is relational. We need each other. We need each other to heal, to mend, and to come out of the fiction of our own isolation.
And thank you. And the message also talks about anesthesia and amnesia, and that it's like I'm trying to find also the common thread with, it was a river of the, when she says we have 5 years as a species to wake up. It's not that we're going to die in 5 years, but that something about that we have 5 years to wake up, mature, and remember who we really are, and that we might be able through this, also through their love, that they are really waiting for us. They really miss us. There is this quality which really broke my heart with love. I never encountered such quality of love, actually, where they are ready to disappear for us because they miss us. They don't feel angry at us. They don't think we're the worst species on the planet. We should disappear so the planet will be better. It's completely not that. So it's like this thing it hasn't quite connected for me about the anesthesia, the amnesia, and then how is grief? What is the role of grief in that? So we are completely anesthetized, mostly completely amnesic about where we belong and who we are. and how to be a human being. Seems to be a big puzzle. So can you speak to that?
Sure. I do. I often speak about amnesia and anesthesia as the two primary sins of modern culture. We forget and we go numb. And the forgetting we've talked a little bit about already, which is just forgetting our embeddedness in life, that we are utterly, utterly dependent upon soil and water and air, for everything. We have this fantasy that somehow that's separate from us. This forgetting is doing so much damage to the world. We forget that we need each other. I mean, we now have it set up so that by the use of this machine, I don't have to have any interaction with another human being. I can order all my food online. I can pay my bills. I don't have to have any contact with other human beings. We call that progress. And the anesthesia, I'm particularly enthralled by that because the word aesthetics is in there. Beauty. And James Hillman talked about how the original term came from aesthesis, which was a Greek phrase about when something touches you so deeply, it takes your breath away. You're having an aesthetic arrest. And that's where we get the word aesthetics, which is the study of beauty. And now we have anesthetic, without beauty, without the body alive. See, beauty is what quickens the body. It awakens the senses. It draws us into the allure of the world. But if we are anesthetized, if we are without senses, without beauty, the world begins to become a pall, kind of a fading memory of something that enchanted us. So what grief does is it softens the receptor site of the heart. Grief is a profound, has the profound capacity to make the heart receptive again to the world. It softens, it makes it pliable, receptive, open, relational again. In the absence of grief work, the heart will congeal and harden and become impenetrable. And we see a lot of people walking through the world this way. Unfortunately, a lot of leadership walking through the world this way. So my faith in grief has become resolute over the past 20 years to see what it can do as a solvent to soften those hardened places. If we are willing to touch grief, the heart begins to open again to the conversation with life. So it has a way of being able to counteract the amnesia and the anesthesia very directly and very immediately. People remember that we need each other, and you can't grieve with a numb body. So we sing, we dance, we drum, we create beauty. You do a lot of that with your work. Beauty is essential to the grief work. Mm-hmm. It is what activates the heart and helps us remember that there's a deeper longing in us for that connection with the living world.
It's lovely to hear this again. So wonderful. How does it land on you, in you, the 5 years? Does it resonate with anything else you've heard before, or any sense in your own body, in your own knowing, because I was a bit surprised, it was quite precise. Just wondered if it's a new thing, that completely a new message for you, or whether it has any connection with something else you've heard before, experienced in your own grief rituals or in your listening to the land, or...
Yeah, I think in that listening to the world, to the land, clearly we're at a very critical time, a threshold time, a time of rough initiation. when we are being ushered either voluntarily or involuntarily towards a precipice of choice, how we respond to a rough initiation. My hope is that when the pressure begins to be applied, like 5 years there's a form of heat that comes with that. It says there is a limit to the inattention that the earth can tolerate. And so every initiation begins in heat, begins in fire. A certain quality of heat that's being applied by that message that we have to quicken, we have to ripen, we have to self-interest, of narcissism, of compartmentalized thinking, all the things that generate suffering for the planet. This is really a challenge to us to wake up and to use this limited time, whether it's 5 years or not, I don't know, but it is not far off. Whatever it is, things are quickening. I mean, we're getting more reports about glaciers in Greenland cracking down the middle of the island. I mean, this is scary stuff.
Mm-hmm.
So whatever fiction we're trying to hold on to, whether technology is going to save the day, or whether it's the broken heart that will save the day, hopefully we will respond. Initiations are tough. They are ordeals. They're not meant to benefit us individually. Initiations are meant for the welfare of the whole, of the commons. It's an act of sacrifice on behalf of the greater good. Assuming that this initiatory threshold is on behalf of the greater good of species and watersheds and salmon and children and all living things. Initiations are fierce.
Yes. As we know. So what shall we do? How do we do? It seems like we need to grow that mycelium of those spaces for grief, and also perhaps somehow a new narrative about what is a rough initiation. Because at the moment it's called breakdown, or the narrative doesn't have that poetry or that link to such ancient wisdom. Right now, is most people are medicated or suicidal or numbing or distracting, or it's too much. And also the isolation is so scary. So what can we do to widen our little circles of grief rituals that we do and more people are doing? What would you say is needed now to just it seems like, like a tree has a new ring. Like it needs almost like, how could we do that? What's growing in you? Because you must be responding as well in your own being. I wonder what's buzzing, what's wanting to come out.
A lot of threads in what you just mentioned. One I really liked is the idea of the imagination. See, part of what we're imprisoned by is the very ideologies of psychology. When we go into a psychological framework, we are reduced to the individual. It's my illness, it's my depression, it's my symptom, and we lose the mythological context of the larger movement of psyche. So we need a much grander imagination about this whole thing. That's one thing which we could spend hours talking about, which I would love to do sometime with you, because it's so vital.
Mm-hmm.
The second thread of that is that we do need to begin to risk experimenting with multiple forms of ritual. Ritual is the most archaic form of art and communal restoration that we know of. We were probably doing ritual before we had language. So this is I think Barry Jensen says, a language older than words.
Mm-hmm.
This is the language older than words. And what we've been doing here is trying to experiment with ritual forms that speak directly to the style and shape of the distortion in our own psychic lives because of Western culture, Western civilization. These things cause us to, in a sense, become quite misshapen. Mm-hmm. And what ritual has the capacity to do is to derange the old shape. And that's part of the power and the fear of ritual. True ritual can derange us, which is its job. Its job is to shake us out of a current arrangement because it's not working.
Yeah.
And to rearrange us back into some form of being that's closer in accordance with soul. So what I'm hoping is that people will begin to have faith in their own capacity to translate the need of the people in their community to create ritual processes that speaks to their sorrows, their communal sorrows. People travel thousands of miles to come to our grief rituals, which is great. I mean, I'm very, very pleased that people are coming from Canada and the East Coast of the States, and that's lovely, but it's also symptomatic. Mm-hmm. It is part of our grief right there. Mm-hmm. At the heart of our grief is that we're not being together locally. That's at the heart of our grief. It's what I call the fourth gate of grief. We expected to be able to grieve together monthly, if not more often, as need be. So part of our job is to create and to encourage small cells of revolution. Places where people are willing to break the taboo and speak about sorrow, and come out of the closet with their grief and say, I am too alone with this. I need community. Grief has always been communal. Mm-hmm. It has never been a private thing. People go to therapy, they come to see me to deal with their grief, and I said, this is lovely, this is good, but this is a place to make contact, but ultimately, you'll need to be weeping side by side with dozens of other people. Mm. Too small a room. Your grief is too big for this. It needs company. It needs witnessing. See, grief is not even a psychological issue. It's a soul issue. It's a revelation of how through loving I am now faced with loss. Mm-hmm. So it's not a pathological circumstance. It's an existential one. It's a human one. It's a soul one that says, I loved and now I am dealing with the absence. Or at my own personal level, that parts of me did not know love, and now I'm grieving that. Or I'm grieving the sorrows of the, roadkill along the side of the road, or I'm dealing with an ancestral thread that's there. The gates are very alive in all of us, aren't they?
The 5 gates you're talking about.
Did I answer you?
You've answered many things. And when you talked about the people flying from, I imagine they were flying from Canada and everything. We talked in the past about training. And I wonder where you are with that, whether it's something that you feel this could be one of the answers to train people so they can do it in their own land.
Well, yes, to give them at least enough of a basis to begin to trust their own intuitions about it. Partly we're fearful of going into that room because the energy is fierce. Grief is an intense whitewater kind of experience. And we're not skilled in it. So, one of the things we have to learn is that grief is not just an emotion, it's a faculty, it's a capacity, it's a skill of being human. And so part of a training would be, how do we learn to skillfully be with the presence of grief, not only just mine, but in a circle, in a community. And I think that's going to be definitely the work that's ahead of us, ahead of you. And you have people that are coming to you for training, and people are asking us for training here. And because the demand, I mean, the encouraging thing is, if I go back a couple of questions, is that I think when we first started offering grief rituals, we had to encourage people to come. You know, there was, why would I want to spend the weekend grieving? This is foolish. I mean, I could be having a happy time. This is a happy. And then about 5 years ago, things began to shift. And people began, you know, signing up quickly. And now we have long waiting lists for our rituals. So that to me is saying that the denial factor is finally beginning to crack culturally. And the conditions of our culture, the conditions of our ecological systems, the conditions of our own psyches can no longer deny that things are fraying at the edges quite rapidly. And we have to address this through grief. Through grief is our primary means of responding to a world in pain, to the refugee situations, I mean, there's so many pieces to this grief but here's the problem, is that if you're trying to face it alone, your heart will wisely shut down.
It's too much.
It's too much.
It's too much.
There's no way a singular heart can process this much sorrow without just collapsing.
Yeah.
So there's wisdom in shutdown, but as soon as someone hears or is given permission in a communal setting to express that, then the healing begins. And again, we often say at the end of our grief rituals, we did this not for our own sakes alone.
Yeah.
But so that when we turn back out of this space, we enter the world with more spaciousness in our hearts, more capacity for compassion, and more capacity for outrage.
For outrage.
For outrage.
Being subversive.
Yeah, James Hillman said that the surest sign of a soul awake is that it's outraged.
Yeah.
So it isn't just to feel better. It is to be able to be responsive. See, that's why we call it soul activism.
Yeah.
Is that the grief work is meant to activate us at a soul level so we can appreciate and respond to a world in trouble, and to a community in trouble, to friendships in trouble, you know. That's really at the heart of the work, is that we are making the world a little bit more capable of responding to its need.
And outrage, the energy of outrage does wake you up.
Absolutely.
Does wake us up.
Yes. Yes.
And yeah, because I'm just remembering the last few words of that message, which was to wake up and mature. And remember who we are and where we belong. There's something about that we belong to this earth, to this web. And you know, the more I'm doing grief work, the more it seems that it's waking up some bone and deep time memory. I wonder if you could speak to that, because I wasn't prepared for this. I didn't expect that to be. I never. But it's like there's something about, and also we talked about legitimacy. Like we are legitimate even if we don't have a tribe behind us or a lineage of ancient earth wisdom behind us that we know of. There's something there about, I'm remembering in my bones that we've always done that across all continents.
Yeah, I remember taking a class in flint napping some years ago. And I told you the story, but we're watching this amazing anthropologist work this piece of obsidian and flaking off these beautiful pieces that he would then, within minutes, turn into these gorgeous arrowheads and spearheads. And then it was our turn, and with our clothes on and shattering pieces of obsidian everywhere. But every once in a while, a piece would come out looking good. But this movement, I recognized the movement. It was in my bones. It was in my deep time memory. I had been making that movement in another body, in another body, in another body for over 2 million years. And when we enter into grief ritual space, that's the same thing. There are movements that made us human, is what I call it. Cordage, dancing together, making baskets, hunting. These are all movements that made us human. And when we stop making those movements, something in us is not activated. And grieving together was one of those movements that made us very human. We acknowledge together, side by side, that a member of our community is no longer alive. Or that something has happened to the village that has caused us great grief. So when we go back into ritual space, we are enacting the same thing like striking a stone. We are enacting something that's wired into us. R.D. Laing, the psychiatrist, said we are born as Stone Age children. Mm-hmm. We come into this world wired with the exact knowing of what our deep time ancestors participated in. And when none of that materializes, we feel empty inside, which is, again, one of those circular problems that we tend to ascribe to me. I'm empty, rather than there's an absence.
Yeah.
The fourth gate never materialized. There's an absence here. But when we get back into that space together, I've heard many, many times at the end of the ritual, someone saying, I've never done that before. It was oddly familiar.
Yeah.
So what is that familiarity? It is that deep memory that this is how we've always done it. There are cultural variations, right? But the basic premise is there, that we wept together. The shrines might look different, the choreography might look different, but the bones of it are the same. We wept together. And that's what we need to remember.
So we might have forgotten a few things, but it's not erased.
No.
And I find that really quite beautiful. For everyone, it is there. It's not gone. It's forgotten, but that's different.
Well, Carl Jung used the phrase once, he said, the most of the trouble we suffer from losing contact with the instincts, the unforgotten wisdom that lies at the core of the psyche. Isn't that a beautiful phrase? The unforgotten wisdom that lies at the core of the psyche. So yeah, when we participate in these old forms, we're touching into the unforgotten wisdom. It's there. We're wired for it. Our design, our entire makeup is shaped around what we were shaped by through our contact with nature and our contact with village and community. Those were the contexts in which our entire psychic shape was made. And so when we lose contact with that, we feel out of shape. We feel misshapen.
And homeless.
And homeless. And that's what that whole feeling of being orphaned and exiled, that's a huge place of suffering for so many of us, this feeling disconnected, dislodged, homeless, like you say. So coming back into that fold where the water speaks, where the community is available, where the trees are archangels of flame, where everything becomes alive again, we're suddenly not homeless. We're suddenly embedded back into the fabric that our ancestors knew as much as they knew breath.
What a beautiful conversation.
I'm having fun.
Yeah, I'm loving it too. I'm feeling a lot of energy, and I'm understanding deeper what the water's talking about. And she's actually, it feels like it's happening in us as we're talking.
I think so.
And giving her attention. This whole series is to not ignore it as a folly or as some, but actually, wow, the water has spoken. And here we are, humans, gathering for this series, gathering, listening, being in conversation with her and with us and with everything, and finding all these pieces. So I can feel that she's quite happy with that.
I often say towards the end of our weekends together that if we did this work regularly, every month, we would soon become current. We wouldn't be living in our pasts. But then I realized the word current means both energetic, like an electrical current, but also the current of water. We would be back in the water. We would be back in the flow of life. We wouldn't be consistently chewing on the bones of our history. We would actually be current.
Current.
Wouldn't that be lovely? Just to be here, to take enjoyment in this breathtaking world that we've been given, rather than being, obsessed with what happened in our childhoods, or, I mean, again, those are all legitimate sufferings and they need attention. I'm not dismissing that at all. But it seems that there's more of a desire in life to have us participate in delight in this life. As they say in Africa, when death finds you, make sure it finds you alive.
That's what Water said in her message at the beginning. She said, I'll recover quickly. And she, I could feel her love for the bird songs and our prayers and our tears. And I could feel, you could see that her relationship with the birds and the trees and the land and the soil, or the joy and our joy. She loves our joy and our songs, not just the sorrow. And that was the current. She's like, it was alive, but not alone. She's never alive alone. I know you love birds.
I do love birds, yes.
She recovers with bird songs. Water recovers with bird songs. And our singing.
Yeah.
Oh, what a delight. Is there anything else, Francis, you'd like to say or respond to this message or to this moment, or to what arises?
I think just to trust the influence, again, using a kind of a watery word, the confluence and the fluidity. There's a lovely line by a Spanish poet, Jaime Gil de Biedma, who said, I believed I wanted to be a poet, but deep down I wanted it to be a poem. I think that's coming back into water state. Well, maybe not just water, maybe every element has its fluidity to it. But to risk sharing what is current, what is moving, what is flowing in your heart with another. It can just be one other human being. But it's really time and necessary for us to come out of our sheltered caves of shame and isolation and comparison, and find the solace of a village and of a community, and do the restorative work of grief so that we can feel joy again. Unmetabolized grief is oppressive. It's settled on us like sediment, and it's very hard to touch joy when there is this weightiness, this heaviness that oppresses us. So doing the work of grief, also, I have known more joy in the past 20 years because of more laughter, more, playfulness and delight as a consequence of that work. So, do it for that reason. You feel more alive again.
Okay, I feel moved to speak for people who would listen to this and watch this, and they are alone and they don't have a village, and there is no grief rituals where they are. What is the next step they can take? So, yeah.
An excellent question, and it's invariably true for many of us. The good news is that at every corner you walk around, you will meet somebody who knows sorrow.
Yes.
No, there are no exemptions to this rule. And hopefully you have, at least in your life, one or two people that you trust who are friends. Maybe on Friday night you invite them over to your house and you say, tonight the topic will be sorrow. And we'll not try to fix each other. We're not going to offer advice. Maybe we'll light a candle and say a prayer. Maybe we'll speak and put a stone in a bowl of water and do something very simple. But the main thing is to offer the invitation. People are starving for the invitation to speak about their sorrows.
Yeah.
And so that's the thing I would suggest, is that even just 2 or 3 people coming together in someone's home to speak about the truth of loss.
Yeah.
And you might find yourself laughing by the end of the night.
Yeah. Yeah, beautiful.
You know?
Beautiful. And at the back of your book, you have a few simple rituals, don't you? So the book, The Wild Edge of Sorrow.
Yeah.
I'll put that at the bottom. Wonderful. Is there anything else you'd like to say before we...
Well, I would just, obviously extend my deep, deep gratitude to you and to the water spirits, whom I'm fairly, hopefully, faithful servant, being part of the water clan myself, trying to bring that energy into the world right now, in my own way. But thank you. And I want to, again, thank you also for the deep sensitivity you carry to be receptive to those messages in this very trying time.
Thank you. I'm so happy you brought the blessing of water. That's amazing medicine. Thank you. Wonderful, Francis. So I wish you a beautiful day over there in California. It's the end of the day for us. And I will speak to you again, no doubts, maybe for another message.
No doubt.
Take good care of yourself.
You too.
Bye.
Bye-bye.